Similar to virtual machines, we've got many other different ways to deploy. Like for example, the same web app that we were talking about, it need not require a complete machine for it. So because when we are talking about a VM, we are talking about operating system, we need to deal with the networking, the firewall, the upgrades. A new version of Windows comes in, and we have to install it onto the server. All of these are going to be your responsibility if you are creating a virtual machine. And also when it comes to scalability, if if there is some scheme or offer that comes in, and all your customers are flooding onto the server, you can't easily multiply these onto different virtual machines, or build the virtual machines to grow in size. It is technically possible, but it's not as easy. So considering those challenges, there are different ways to deal with this problem. So if you're for example, if you're deploying just a web app, then your web app doesn't need to have a lot of features that are required for a standard virtual machine. You just need a web app. You're doing an npm run build, and you have a package that is available. You're deploying that package on to one of the servers. It doesn't require a whole virtual machine. We can very well use a service that is available, which will take care of this hosting. So web app is something that will simplify our job of adding a compute system. So we spoke about two options right now. One option was to deploy onto a virtual machine, and another option was to deploy onto a web app, which makes our job a little simpler by not having to deal with the machine as such. All we need to do is go to the deployment center over there, and check out how we want to attach our files. Generally, the common approach is to connect your GitHub account, or maybe you have an Azure DevOps account, and or, you run some sort of GitHub actions, which will whenever you deploy your latest code onto GitHub, or you make a commit onto GitHub, it automatically triggers a new build, and that gets pushed onto your web app. So that's just an example. I don't want to go deep again, so I'm going to close this tab and let's move on. So we spoke about compute. Virtual machines and web apps are part of compute. I'll move on to databases. So this is something most of us are familiar with, because we work on databases day in day out as part of our projects. So when it comes to databases, we have the most popular one, which is a SQL database. We generally use SQL databases in older projects. We used to use SQL databases that were hosted on local infrastructure, which is on premise. But now it's a lot easier to create a new instance of SQL database. You don't need to download it onto a virtual machine that's hosted locally. You can pretty much just click on create over here, specify some parameters about it, like the database name, the server that it needs to create. Like in this case, I don't have a server existing, so I can create a new server with some server name, some username and password, and that's about it. And the location, it will create a SQL server for me, and over here it's creating a database for me. So with that, I have a properly functioning SQL database within Azure, which I can connect to from directly using the username and password. So it's very convenient. I don't need to install SQL Server on my machine. So that is another service that's commonly used. We have many other services as well. We've got Cosmos DB, and it's a NoSQL database. Makes it a lot easier to connect your data in a JSON or BSON format. Moving on. So when it comes to networking, you may not do a lot of stuff to set up a network. You don't need to do a lot of maintenance on a network normally, because it's all about setting up the infrastructure to build a virtual network system. But then it is the backbone of all our services. So let's take again the virtual machine that we talked about earlier. In order to access that virtual machine, you have an option to make it publicly available by giving a public IP address. You have the option to make it accessible only within a particular VPN, the virtual network that your company or yourself have defined. So all of these things are configured right over here in the networking tab, and all these are generally part of the administrator roles. So you would, and when you create a virtual machine, it automatically creates it. Let me show you what I mean by it. So earlier I created this virtual machine, the VM demo. Along with that, if you see here, it automatically added a VM demo IP, VM demo NSG, network interface, and virtual network, and so on. Whatever starts with the VM prefix over here, including the disk, all of these get created. So essentially, we are not just creating a virtual machine, you're creating an IP address as well. You're creating a disk, and the disk is basically something like a storage account. And we've not talked about storage yet, but it is where your operating system lives. So whenever you create a VM, the disk gets automatically created, and it'll have all the operating system related things. You cannot access a disk from outside the VM. It is central or internal to the VM, because it is where the system lies. So similarly, the network interface, the NSG, as well as a few of the other parameters get automatically created for every VM that gets added. You can customize this. You can remove a public IP address if you don't need it. While configuring a VM, you can specify that this is meant to be internal only, which means it lies only within your network service, network security group, or the virtual network. Going back to the resources, create resource. So we spoke about networking. Moving on, the next topic is storage, and this is something that everybody would use in Azure in one form or the other. So let's say you want to create, an ecosystem of VMs, or you want to create multiple databases. If you want to create some IoT, connectors, or so on. Whatever application you're building generally requires a storage account. Storage account is like, a data store. Google Drive, OneDrive, all those are technically storage accounts as a service. But then this one is going to go a lot deeper into it. We When we say storage account, over here we have multiple types of storage. We could have blob storage, we have file storage, depending on the type of data that you're storing. So the reason for having a storage account will differ from the type of application you're dealing with, but it will always be an essential thing. Let me open a storage account to show you what it actually contains. I've already created a storage account, and within this I can have either files or containers. I mean, within containers I can have blobs and so on. So let's take an example. You have a web application, and within that web application you have some images to be shown. Like, it's an e-commerce application, and you have some of the items like shoes, and socks or whatever. So you need to display these icons or pictures onto your web page whenever your application is loaded, and you can't expect all of these files to live as part of your web app. So you want some of these files to be pulled from an external source, easily accessible, and available for everybody. So a storage account is used for that purpose. We'll be able to put all our video files or any generic files that are not part of the application, application functional logic. We put it all of it into a storage account. Um, Let me close that, and coming to the last part, which is also another category, but at the same time it is an extension of compute. And this category basically helps you deploy an application without requiring a complete service, a complete virtual machine. So in this case, if you see, there are let's take these two as an example. We can create a web app or a static web app. So a static web app is like a blog page which doesn't have any dynamic content. It just loads up the same content every single time, and you can change the content and redeploy, but you'll not be able to normally. I mean, in today's world, you can do it using React and Angular and some of these front-end technologies, but generally speaking, static web app is an application which is having files that are static in nature. So both of these aren't something that you will require a complete virtual machine for. You don't want to deploy a whole, require a whole virtual machine and deploy the whole thing in there, deal with the upgrades, deal with scaling up and everything. So a web app, let me show you a web app. So a web app is something where you can just deploy your code by selecting the various connectors that are available. Let's say you've got GitHub and you pull attach it, and that's it. And with this you'll be able to load it up. I'm going to click on browse, and it's already created a URL for me. I can attach my own URL as well, as long as I'm the owner of that URL, and I'll be able to publish it and it will show up over here. So this is a form of service which under the hood it uses a virtual machine, and it has a disk, it has all of these things that we are creating over here. But then just by using this one service, it's saving us the effort of dealing with all of these other services. So it's making our job a lot simpler, along with making it easier for us to scale as well and migrate. If we want to move this application from East US to let's say West US, or North Europe, um, I just need to move this app service, and under the hood it will move all of these other services that it created onto the other environment. So it's a lot easier to deal with a more feature rich app service than this. Scalability is a very important thing, and deployments and dynamic reload and all these things are pretty crucial with it. We can easily take care of that within Azure just by using the service. So yeah, there we have it. So we've gone through some of the core features of Azure in a nutshell. We have a lot more things that Azure provides, specifically AI and blockchain and DevOps are some of the things that we come across quite frequently. But it all depends on which certification you're planning for, and if your target is to learn AI specifically, then you have specific certifications for that, and even then all of the stuff that we mentioned just now is going to come handy. So I hope this helps you, and we'll probably have a little more detailed discussions going forward, and hopefully we'll be able to share some videos and articles with you guys, so that we can cater to a more specific set of audience. This was a very generic discussion, but we want to make sure that people who are taking, let's say, AZ 304, I mean 305, or the ones that are AI specific, they don't feel like they're going through something that they've already been working on for a really long time.